What made you leave a job interview early? Them. We have a very dedicated team. We often stay after normal office hours. Is that okay with you? Me? Sure, I'm single without kids. So if it's adequately compensated, I'm happy to do as much overtime as necessary, no problem. Them. Oh no, we're passionate about the work we do here, so overtime is not paid. Me. Okay then. Thank you for your time and goodbye.
This reminds me of a job I had where they expected everyone to stay late, but always mentioned passion over pay. I was single too, but I realized my time was worth something. When they told me the overtime wasn't paid, I just left. No point in burning out for free. Sometimes you gotta know your worth and not get caught up in the corporate hype.
The job was advertised as morning shift. The interviewer starts to explain how I would be used as a wild card to fill any shift that was needed, including short notice. Edit. Got another one. Went to a job interview for a listing listed as job at a huge high-tech firm on the West Coast. All it was a recruiter scouting for people. There was no interviews with any company. He just wanted to build my profile. He explained that if he found me a job, I would be an employee of his for 2 years before I would be an employee for the actual company. I wanted to bail then, but as soon as he said I wouldn't have any benefits and minimum wage, I noped the fuck out. Got up, grabbed my coat. I was shaking my head while putting on my coat, and as I was walking out he said, "I'll just put you down as a lost cause." I am familiar with headhunters and was working with 2 other headhunters at that time. His terms were just straight robbery.
That recruiter move sounds pretty rough. It's frustrating when a job listing doesn't match reality. I've had a similar experience where I went into an interview thinking it was for a great position, only to find out it was just about building their candidate pool. It's disheartening, especially the part about no benefits and minimum wage. It's good you trusted your gut and walked away from that. Some offers just aren't worth it.
I accidentally walked out on an interview. I had driven 4 hours to apply for a bar/gaming room job in preparation for moving cities for study. I had purchased an apartment, so I kind of had to take job searching seriously. I had spent about 20 minutes talking to the gaming manager, during which time the venue manager joined us, when some guy came up to them and started chatting to them. I sat there for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, wondering if the interview was over, when I decided that most questions had been asked and my existence had barely been acknowledged since the guy had rocked up. I half interrupted, shook one of the interviewer's hands and said thanks, and exited the premises with no idea how the interview went. Was crossing the road to my car when one of the interviewers chased me across the road and offered me the position. Turns out the guy interrupting the interview was one of the owners of the venue. I sometimes wonder how I get through life considering how socially inept I can be.
That's a pretty wild story. It's easy to see how that could happen, especially in a job interview setting. Sometimes you just read the room wrong. At least it turned out alright for you. Getting chased down with a job offer is a bit unexpected. But hey, we all have those moments where we feel out of place. It sounds like you were meant for that job, despite the awkwardness.
I was told about 40 minutes into an interview that the job I was interviewing for was going to be an 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. position. This had never been mentioned in the original job posting or in the preliminary call prior to the interview. This wasn't for a gas station job or anything either. High-profile law firm who basically needed a graphic designer to put together presentation materials overnight for use the following day. They also set it so that I'd be working hours just barely under the limit to qualify as a full-time employee with benefits. Again, none of this was ever mentioned in the job description up to this point. The last straw was that they gave me a 30-minute test to prove I could work on a deadline, based on the actual materials I'd be working with, chicken scratch post-it notes, unintelligible audio recordings, and other horrible sources I had to base my designs on. I walked out of the test about 5 minutes in.
That sounds really frustrating. It's weird how companies can skimp on details that really matter. I get why you left. It's tough to commit to a job that doesn't align with what you expected, especially with those hours. I've had a similar experience. where the role turned out to be completely different from what was promised. Sometimes you just have to prioritize your time and energy.
Just after I had been given 3 months' notice of layoff due to office closure from a job that I really liked, I took off early one day for an interview across town. When I arrived, I entered a waiting room full of people at least twice my age, in suits, resumes in hand. Upon seeing this sight, I realized I had very little chance at the position being offered, but since I was there, I may as well try. What I didn't expect is that we were all scheduled to interview together. We were all herded into a conference room, where the group interview commenced. After a few rounds of questions, learning each other's qualifications, how we would handle various situations, and so on, we collectively learned that this position was part-time, not what had been advertised, and paid a mere $9 an hour. I walked out along with 3 other people.
That sounds like a rough situation. I can relate to those moments when you're just trying to make the best of things. Seeing an unexpected crowd for an interview can really mess with your confidence. And then to find out the pay and hours are less than you expected? That's just a letdown. I guess sometimes you just have to keep moving forward, even when it feels unfair.
I walked out of an interview before it began once. The interview was scheduled for 10 a.m., which I double-checked from the voicemail that they left. I showed up about 10 minutes early, signed in, all that jazz, and waited. 45 minutes later, I got up, asked the receptionist, who looked seriously embarrassed, to let my interviewer know I was no longer interested, and left. 2 hours later, I got a rude call asking if I had forgotten the appointment. I laughed and hung up.
That's pretty wild. I mean, showing up on time and then just waiting for almost an hour. Props for handling that well, though. It's frustrating when others don't respect your time. Leaving before the interview makes sense, especially after being ignored like that. Getting a rude call afterward just adds to it. Laughing it off is a good move. Better things ahead, right?
I posted this a couple years ago, but may as well post it again for this thread. So, had an interview at a Starbucks for some kind of marketing/insurance company. The lady said that they don't market themselves and they rely on word of mouth. Jeder Redflag AITA 1. Then she said they weren't a pyramid scheme, even though it sounded like one. She said it was multi-level marketing. Red flag number 2. Red flag number 3? She got to the end of the interview and tried to have me sign up for their services. They were a company that supposedly sold insurance. Only I'd have to pay in order to have that privilege. She wanted me to put in my credit card number and a bunch of info, including my social security number. I excused myself, thanked the lady for her time, and left.
That sounds like a pretty sketchy situation. I've had a similar experience with a job interview once. The guy was all about the hustle, but the vibe was off. He kept talking about how great the commission was, but didn't say anything about the base pay. I ended up walking out too. Sometimes you just gotta trust your gut and recognize when something isn't right.
I went into the interview with my prospective supervisor. I looked around the office and noticed that the garbage cans were full, the walls and carpet dirty, and the supervisor's desk was old and had chips out of it. So I mentioned that the company didn't seem to be doing any basic upkeep, and then asked point blank, "Is this a good company to work for?" She replied no and hung her head. I said thanks and walked out.
That's an interesting situation. It's always surprising when an interview takes a turn like that. You expect things to feel organized and professional, and then you see the opposite. I guess her reaction spoke volumes about the company culture. Sometimes it's better to know upfront that a place isn't right for you. It saves time and energy in the long run.
Back in high school, I had an interview at Cold Stone Creamery. They made us break into groups where we had to create and sing a catchy tip song. I'm really shy, so I wanted to walk out before the singing commenced, but I really needed a job, so I decided to try and stick it out. I sang the stupid song. After the songs, they interviewed us one-on-one. For one question, they basically asked us what we thought the weaknesses of our group members were. I told them I didn't know the people well enough to say, and that I really didn't want to get a job by bad-mouthing someone else. As I got up to leave, they asked me if I wanted to hear what some of my group members had said about me. I just kept walking. Should have gone with my gut and left before the singing.
Sounds like a tough spot to be in. Group dynamics can be awkward, especially with singing involved. It's interesting how sometimes you push through a situation, thinking it might work out, but it ends up being uncomfortable instead. Your instinct to not badmouth others was solid. Walking away from that question was probably the best move too. It's good you stayed true to yourself, even if it felt hard at the moment.
I recently went to an interview for a bank in my area. First, the woman I spoke to on the phone misrepresented herself. She told me she was the assistant branch manager. Upon arrival, she told me she was head teller. The branch manager would be arriving shortly. I waited for an hour. After an hour of me double-checking the time and wondering if I'd gotten there instead of early, I got up to leave. The head teller said she'd be there in 5 minutes, but at that point, I just figured I obviously wasn't important enough. I left. I got a call back 3 days later apologizing and asking if they could set up another meeting at a bank I was nowhere near. I politely declined.
I remember a similar experience with a job interview. I showed up on time, only to find out the person I was supposed to meet had double booked. I waited around for over an hour, figuring maybe I misunderstood. Eventually, I just left, feeling like I wasted my day. They reached out later too, asking me to come back, but I had already moved on. It's frustrating how some places operate.
I walked out about halfway through because the dude was too busy on his phone. I thought maybe he was recording my responses in his phone. Then he laid the phone down on the table to write down some of what I was saying and noticed it was his Facebook open. I got up and walked out. I had a feeling he wasn't paying attention to anything I was saying. The dude was the head paramedic or whatever at the ambulance company I applied to. I just imagine people are dying in front of his face while he's using his Facebook.
That sounds frustrating. It's tough when you're trying to have a serious conversation and the other person isn't engaged. The fact that he was the head paramedic makes it even worse. You want someone who's focused on saving lives, not scrolling through Facebook. It must have felt like a waste of time for you. It's hard to trust someone in that position when they're distracted like that.
There was one job I had applied for. I was getting desperate for work as I hadn't had a job in months. It was a fast food position at the other end of the city, a 45-minute bus ride away if traffic was nice. I got there for the interview. Everything was going well. Then the manager mentioned that the position would only have a few hours per week, less than 20 at minimum wage. I did some mental math and realized that it wouldn't be enough to cover my monthly bills. At that point, I thanked him for his time and told him that I just couldn't take the position as I wouldn't be making enough to pay my bills. It ended amicably. He said he understood and was sorry that he just couldn't offer more hours.
That's rough. Going through a job search can be pretty stressful, especially when you're counting on it to pay bills. It's good that you recognized right away that it wouldn't work for you. Better to walk away than to stress over not making enough. At least the manager was understanding. It's tough out there, but I guess you just have to keep looking for something that fits better.
After my brother started high school, my mom wanted to go back to work. She applied for all these jobs, but no one wanted to hire her. Somebody called my mom up and asked her for an interview. They were looking for a receptionist, and someone gave them her resume. They spoke on the phone for a while, then gave Mom the address for the interview. She Googled the address and the site for a high-class escort service / brothel. She didn't go. We also never found out how they got a hold of her resume, because we certainly didn't send it to them.
That's a pretty wild story. Your mom must have been shocked when she found out what kind of place she was applying to. It's strange how things happen, like someone getting a hold of a resume without permission. It's good she didn't go to that interview. Definitely would have been an awkward situation. Just shows how unpredictable life can be sometimes.
It was a bait and switch. Looked like a film/TV production job, but turned out to be this weird sales/marketing position. Outbound calls and traveling to stores to sell displays, something like that. I wasn't rude, but I called the guy out, said the job he was talking about didn't really match the description on Craigslist. That should have been my first indicator. He said something like, "It's a job, right?" and shrugged. I thanked him for his time and walked out. I couldn't have been there more than 5 minutes.
That sounds frustrating. You think you're going for one thing, and then it turns into something completely different. It's good you called him out on it. A lot of people would just go along with it. At least you didn't waste more time there. Better to walk away early than get stuck in something you don't want. Hope you found something better afterward.
I got a call about a marketing position I applied to in NYC. The posting seemed legit, but after I applied, the red flags started flying. Their website said nothing about what they do or what services they offered, just about how much their employees loved working at this place. Then they made the mistake of calling me within 30 minutes of applying. I know I had a damn good resume, but a response within a half hour was absurd. Then they just raved about me, told me they wanted to move me up to the group interview in 3 days on Monday in NYC. At this point I said yes, but I was highly suspicious of their super fast pace. Then came the research. I looked into the phone number they called from, and that led me to a company with a similar name, which showed me that they were being deceptive of who they really are. The company was in the business of selling energy. Basically, in the area, there are companies that resell energy from the electricity provider. No call, I just didn't go.
Yeah, I've seen that before. A friend applied for a job that seemed perfect at first. But the company had a vague website and was way too eager to set up an interview. Called him right after he applied, which was a huge red flag. He did some digging and found out they weren't even legit. He dodged that bullet for sure. Sometimes moving fast isn't a good sign.
I went on a job interview while employed in my current company. A company that is safe, with great coworkers and a laid-back, fun environment. However, the salary was less than industry average and a long commute. So I applied at another place. As I am in the interview, it is going great, but then the reality of leaving my current job hits like a ton of bricks. I start bobbling questions I was acing before, and then I realize I just wasn't ready to leave yet. I knew me leaving would hurt the company immensely, and that leaving would hurt people I know considered more friends than coworkers. So I told my interviewer, and he understood completely. He saved my record on file and ended the interview on a good note.
It sounds like a tough decision. You got comfortable at your current job, and the thought of leaving made you second-guess everything. It's interesting how personal connections can really weigh on your choices. At least the interviewer was understanding, so you didn't burn any bridges. Sometimes staying put is the right call, even when other opportunities seem appealing. It's about what feels right for you at the moment.
Did a group interview once for a family-style restaurant. They referred to it as a casting call. There were at least 20 of us, and the manager kept going on and on about how much she wanted employees who were people persons, said with a large fake smile on her face. She then went on about what a strict regime she led at the restaurant and just acted like an all-around horrible micromanager. I mean, at least she was honest about it all. But in the middle of her little speech, I just got up and walked out.
That sounds pretty uncomfortable. Group interviews can be awkward enough without the added pressure of a casting call. The manager's mixed messages probably made it even worse. I get that you walked out. No point in sitting through all that if it's clear the work environment isn't for you. Sometimes it's better to trust your gut and move on to something better.
As a cook, I've been through many interview processes I wanted to leave. The only time I actually did was when I went into a tiny one-man show type thing, and the guy sits me down to talk. Just then a customer comes in, and he serves them food. I figure it's fair enough considering he's the only guy there. When he's done, he asked me to go into the kitchen and wash some dishes while he leaves. I washed a sink full of dishes before I left. Fuck that guy. TLDR, guy doing interview leaves before conducting it. Still washed dishes though.
I get where you're coming from. It's frustrating when someone wastes your time like that. You showed some character by washing the dishes though. It's a strange situation, having to do work while trying to get a job. I'd probably have walked out too after that. Seems like some people just don't know how to handle interviews.
Are you deciding to have any kids soon? We'd rather not hire you than have to fire you when you're knocked up. I was 15 at the time. Another time, I was around the same age. I was being interviewed for a babysitting job. All of a sudden, she hands me a sheet of chores including making dinner and being a waitress for the parents, cleaning the chimney and gutters. Laundry had to be washed, folded, and put away, cleaning toilets and times. Every room had to be vacuumed. She then said that the kid would be on daycare, so I'd have plenty of privacy. I just left.
That's a tough situation for a 15-year-old. The first comment is pretty messed up. It's definitely not something you expect to hear in an interview. And the second experience sounds overwhelming. It's wild how some people have unrealistic expectations, especially for a babysitting job. Just taking on those chores is way too much for what it should be. At least you knew when to walk away.
When I had an interview in a bar for a part-time student job, I would always come in an hour or so early, sit down, have lunch or a couple of coffees, and just taste the atmosphere, so to say. I mean, the police is going to pay me peanuts, which I know and accept, so at least the vibe has to be good. One time while I was scouting the place, a girl dropped a tray of drinks, breaking some glasses and wasting the drinks. No big deal. Shit happens. A guy who was working with her started yelling at her in front of the guests. An absolute no-go, even if there are no guests. Right there, and then I got up, paid for my coffees, and asked to see the guy I had the interview with, which turned out to be the yelling guy. Told him thank you, goodbye.
I get that. I once went to an interview at a coffee shop and saw a similar vibe. The staff were stressed, and one of them snapped at a coworker over a mistake. It really turned me off. I know jobs can be tough, but keeping it respectful is key. I decided right then I wouldn't want to work there. Left without looking back. Sometimes, it's just about the environment, you know?
Went for an interview at a school, which turned out to be a group interview. Something I absolutely hate, because to my mind it shows a lack of respect for the individual candidates. It quickly emerged from how buddy-buddy the other candidate was with the interviewer, that they had known each other for some time. It was obvious to me that the school had already decided who they wanted to hire, and that they had plucked some other poor sap at random from the pool of applicants to make the process look above board. I had already been given my travel expenses, so I had no qualms about saying, "Excuse me, I think we're done here," and leaving. Really pissed me off, given that I had traveled halfway across the country.
That sounds frustrating. Group interviews can feel pretty unfair, especially when it seems like the decision is already made. It's tough to invest time and energy into something that feels rigged. Leaving was a bold move, but sometimes you have to trust your instincts. Traveling that far only to feel like you're wasting your time would get anyone angry. You just wanted a fair shot.
I had one successful conventional interview and was called back for a second. The interviewer for the second said, "I'm not going to ask you any questions. Instead, I want you to spend 30 minutes trying to convince me to give you the job." I said, "I would rather not work for someone who would think that to be an acceptable interview technique," and walked out.
That's an interesting approach you took. Most people might feel pressured to sell themselves, but standing your ground shows confidence. I think you made the right call. It's important to work in an environment that respects you. It's not just about getting a job, but finding the right fit. Sometimes, walking away says more than trying to please someone who doesn't value your perspective.
Sure, I was told that I would be training into a management position. I was excited but was sort of questioning them pairing me up with this guy and driving around town. Lo and behold, we are actually selling lamps door to door. I followed the guy for the morning, then got pissed that the interview was actually them getting me to try to work for free. And I walked out. And by walked out, what I mean was they stranded me in a bad part of town, and I had to call my boyfriend to come get me.
That sounds pretty rough. It's wild how things can turn out so differently from what you expect. Going in for a management training and ending up selling lamps door to door is a bit of a letdown. Being stranded after realizing it was a scam must have been frustrating. Good thing you had your boyfriend to help out, though. Definitely a story to remember for sure.
They showed me firsthand what I would be doing during my interview. Turns out I'd be walking up and down the street trying to sell makeup to strangers. After they told me to go back to the office, they were going to tell the boss that I was a perfect candidate and told me I'd definitely get the job. I hopped in my car and drove straight home, never going back for the end of the interview.
That sounds pretty intense for an interview. Selling makeup to strangers is not what I'd expect. Honestly, it's weird they thought that was a good way to gauge your skills. Once I had a similar experience, but it was more of a group activity. I just left feeling it wasn't the right fit. I guess you know right away whether a job vibes with you or not.
Small IT firm. Interview goes pretty well. We actually moved on from the what are your credentials to how could we make you support this firm, so I'm pretty confident. At the end of the interview, the manager nods to me and says, "Well, I've got some other people coming in, but we'll sign this paper." He produces a blank sheet of paper. "Here, right corner," he says. "I'm not signing a blank paper. Hey, it's to make things go quicker." "Sorry, sir, not signing that." "Well, no job then." He looked at me like he thought I'd crumble. Okay, and away I walked. Fun fact, the man was arrested a few years later for fraud.
That's a wild experience. It's not every day you get put in a situation like that during an interview. Standing your ground over a blank paper showed a lot of character. It's interesting how things turned out for him later. Kind of makes you think about the choices people make in positions of power. I guess trusting your instincts pays off sometimes, even when it feels risky.
I've done it several times, usually because I discovered too late that it's the aforementioned MLM/pyramid scheme or telemarketing. One time it was because the compensation was insulting. Another time, the job listing said full-time, which was strictly what I needed, and they apparently changed their minds between posting the job and interviewing me for a non-negotiable part-time position. Funny thing, when you're desperate for full-time work, you'll apply for anything and everything, and find yourself very nearly sucked into some quite unfavorable career situations.
I get that. Job searching can be rough, and you often end up in weird places. I once applied for a job that sounded perfect, but it turned out to be one of those weird sales gigs. They sold some weird products, and the pay was all commission. I couldn't believe it. It's frustrating when you're just trying to find something stable and you keep hitting these dead ends.
I had applied to work at Kmart. I had experience with sales/working registers, so essentially that's what I applied for. Well, I walked in, told the girl at the customer service desk I was there for my application interview. So the girl behind the desk was the same girl that would be conducting my interview. She looked at me, told me that the positions I had applied for were not needed all that bad, but they did need a maintenance person and that I could start right then and there. I honestly thought I was being pranked until I looked over at the desk again. Behind this lady was a mop, bucket, and some cleaning supplies. She was not joking. As she was telling me what I'd be doing, I hadn't even agreed to the maintenance position. I just up and walked out. No, not doing it.
Sounds like a classic case of unexpected turns. You go in for a sales job, and they throw you into janitorial work on the spot. Honestly, I can understand the need to walk out. It's tough when things don't align with your expectations. Sometimes, you gotta stick to what you're comfortable with. Better to find something that fits rather than getting stuck with a mop, right?
I came into an interview for a management position and fully expected to have a good 2 to 3 hour interview with at least 5 people in the room. I got an 18-minute interview with 2 people. Walked out. I knew they did not want me, so I left. Later on, I talked to a person inside the company, and the position I was interviewing for was already predetermined to be filled, but according to HR, they had to interview people. That was bullshit to waste my time.
Sometimes interviews can be a real joke. You prepare for a marathon, and it turns into a sprint. Knowing they had already made up their minds just makes it worse. I was in a similar situation once. You feel like you're just checking a box for them. It's frustrating when your time is treated like that. Lesson learned, I guess. Sometimes it's better to walk away early.
I was asked whether I am religious. Upon answering no, the business owner and HR manager, husband and wife, took the time to try and convert me to JW. After nearly 20 minutes of JW talk and no job interview-related questions, I pointed out that asking about religion, sexuality, and political views were big no-nos of any interview. Needless to say, these people ignored me and kept talking about religion, so I stood up and left while the owner was mid-sentence.
That sounds frustrating. It's wild how some people don't respect boundaries. You'd think a job interview would focus on skills and experience, not personal beliefs. It's like they were more interested in preaching than hiring. I get why you walked out. Sometimes you just have to stand up for yourself. It's a shame that they couldn't see or respect your perspective. You dodged a bullet there.
I've walked out of several interviews and even, nicely, requested my resume back once the interviewer has told me the wage they start at. Simply will not work for minimum or just barely above minimum wage. Why waste my time? And there's continuing. You start at $825? Sorry, I can't afford to work here. Thanks anyway. May I have my resume back, thanks?
I get it. It's frustrating when companies don't pay what you're worth. I've had similar experiences where I realized halfway through an interview that the pay just wouldn't cut it. It's better to leave early than waste time when you know it's not going to work out. At least asking for your resume back keeps things professional. It's all about knowing your value and sticking to it.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love,